Good evening, and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP, Urbana, 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. It is. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or as we like to say on the TV version of the show, UPTV. Whose views are these? Well, that's a very good question, and we will attempt to answer it right now with our two charming guests who will hopefully introduce themselves. Hit that microphone or do something. Oh, it works. Okay.
Okay. My name is Francesca.
Uh-huh.
And I am a second-year graduate student in the urban planning program here at the university.
Aha. Really?
Hello, my name is Daniel. I'm a second-year PhD student in the geography department.
Geography department. Yes. Maps, right?
Partially.
Was that how you got interested in geography? Was you were interested in maps? You like maps?
No, I actually got interested in geography. In my undergrad, I took a geography course, and it was quite different than a lot of the other courses in the sense that it sort of mixed a bunch of different disciplines and topics, and it sort of it gave me a clear picture of the world, in a sense. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I don't know that I would ever have thought about it like that, but I guess that's kind of what you're studying, is you're trying to understand or invent or interpret ways of identifying space or describing space, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, so geography normally is broken into different parts. There's map making or cartography and GIS, and then there's human social geography, and there's physical geography. So I happen to do human geography, and like you said, it's sort of understanding how places come to be and how they affect people, how people produce them. Whatever social relationships exist outside of that just exist in society, they're expressed in space. So our job is to understand those relationships.
So urban planning is like a very specific aspect. It's kind of like geography. Is it related? I mean,
I think it's very related. Would you agree with that?
I think it's related. I think planning is more practical. How are we going to what's the best way we could utilize or create space? Ours is more just let's understand it. So it's less practical, more theoretical.
So planning might be the application of geography?
It could be, yeah.
It could be.
So you've used the word space in a way now that I had not ever heard until not that long ago. My day job, I work with a nonprofit that deals with preservation issues, like historic preservation. So I went to a conference a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, something like that. And one of the panels was on creative placemaking. And that was the first time I'd heard of anyone using the word place like that. And it was fascinating to me. It really had very little to do with my particular interest, but I was just really interested in the way these people were describing, like, you take an area, and it's just an area, so there's stuff there. But if you put the right things in it, or you identify the right aspects of it and play up those features and downplay these features, you will have created a place, and which is different from an area. And I was just like, oh, well, okay, that's cool. It really made a lot of sense that somebody would have thought of a word for this or a way of describing it, which I had never. I danced around trying to explain to people why some places are more important than others, or add more to a community than others, but I never had the terminology to use. So it was really interesting to me. So in a sense, you're both dealing with place, but you're more in the topic of creating places, and you're more in an area where you're just describing them or identifying them, right? Kind of?
We were, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the best way, what you're talking about, the best way I've heard it described to me was planners often talk about kind of any place USA. So, you know, like Prospect in Champaign, where it's that stretch with the big box stores can look like anywhere in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, so you have no way to describe that place. You just, you know, oh, it's that street with all the stores. That's all it is. But a place, what we try to do with placemaking and making places meaningful is, you know, where you describe exactly what it looks like, how you feel in that space, and all of that. Yeah.
You find something distinctive about it, and then you try to play up the distinction so that it is not any place USA. It is this place. It's a very distinctive place, and you can even name it. And, you know, a lot of places have names already, but that doesn't make places out of them, I guess. So how do you, what is the class that you're both together in? What's that called again?
Local immigration policy.
Local immigration policy. And
Local
it's in city
immigration
planning.
policy.
Yes.
And it's
you're
part of-
taking, you haven't explained to me why exactly you're taking urban planning courses. I mean, I understand why, but like you know, why are you the only geography student I've met?
I think I'm personally taking the class because for me, I part of my work in geography is I study race and space, right? So I study sort of how people are not only marginalized in different places and spaces, right? But how that marginalization is even needed and is needed even to produce the space. So space for me, normally space is looked at in two different ways. It's either something that's between two known things, right? So there's an empty space, right?
Right.
And it's also looked at as something that maybe planners more look at it this way. It's like something that's out there, and there's things that happen within it, right? So it's like a container,
Yeah.
right? So for me, though, space, or the way the way geography and the way particularly I choose to look at it, is that space is produced. It's dynamically produced, so it's constantly produced by different processes that go on within it. So it's not a container where things happen, but these things happen, and they create space.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not
Now,
sure
are
if
you
guys-
using space interchangeably with place?
Excuse me?
Are you using space and place as having the same meaning, or are you using it as a different term?
I'm using them as a different term. So,
Oh, okay.
So for me, place is something that's already defined. It's already known. Like this is a radio station. We know what.
So
it's,
this is a place.
This is a place, but it also could be a space. It could be a space that.
Yeah.
It could be a space of, if we were in commercial radio, of selling ads, right?
Right.
But it's public radio, so it's a public space where we discuss and share ideas.
Yeah. So space and place can be the same thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
They can both describe a similar area bounded by our imagination. We've decided that what's in this outline here is, it is a space. Everything is a space of some sort,
Yeah.
but places are distinct
Yeah.
spots within spaces. But we need more words, I think.
Yeah.
Or more specific words.
Yeah.
You guys, you're falling down. You got to invent some words. I thought that's what academics were good at, was inventing new terms that just left everybody else going, what
Yeah.
are they talking about?
They're out there. It's just,
Academic jargon.
I don't want to confuse everybody.
Yeah, well, no, I like to learn these things because it's useful when you're trying to describe things to have a terminology to use for that. You know, that's why some of us wave our hands around, because we're like trying to like grasp these concepts and like, okay, if I can just hold the concept right here, maybe you can see it, and then I talk about it and maybe you'll understand it. You know, it's very interesting. So immigration. Wait, okay, I have
So-
to step back. What is the class again? Immigration.
Immigration policy, yeah. So I would be
Immigration
interested
policy, yeah.
how, you know, is it, sorry,
Go ahead.
how has it informed your own research, or, you know, has it been useful for you, or is it, how are you liking learning about planning?
Well, I'm looking at more how immigration or difference in general, right? So human difference is sort of how planners conceptualize that, right? So how do they frame that as a problem? How is immigration framed as a problem? and then the practices that come out of that, right? So, like a lot of the readings we've done in this class, sort of frame immigrants as a problem, right? That need
Right.
and then solutions to it need to be solved by planners, right? And that's one of the ways in which is important for me as a geographer to understand the way places are created.
Yeah.
So, could we say that there's like a hierarchy of, what would you call it, distrust that starts with race at the top and then maybe goes, secondary would be like religion or social class, and then farther down might be, I'm not even sure what the next one would be, in terms of what makes people uncomfortable with immigration. Because, there was a big period during the 1800s when there were a lot of immigrants coming over from Europe. So people were dividing them into Eastern Europeans, like, oh, we don't want those. But Western Europeans, oh, sure, those are great. So they were trying to invent ways of, like, why are these people bad and these people good? So since they didn't really have race necessarily, although they were inventing things, like Irish was sort of a race for a while, or at least it was treated like a race. And some Eastern Europeans were. There were a lot of things about Jewish people and gypsies, and they were finding ways of sticking race in there, but it didn't become as big a deal until later, or at least until they had something specific like the Chinese Exclusion Act and all that stuff. So there were like distinct racial barriers that were being placed, but there were also these like floundering for reasons why it was okay to accept these people and not okay to accept those people. So it seems to me that there was like kind of a distinct, like, okay, if you can't use A, then you automatically go to B, and if that doesn't work, then you can go to C. There were, and I'm not sure I have these right, because maybe religion is above social class or below it. I'm not sure.
Well, I think they changed. They change in time and place in different places you go to. Gender might be more important than all of those, or whatever. They just change wherever in time, both time and space.
Yeah, it seems really interesting that basically what's going on is that people who already are there want to have a say about who gets to come here.
Yeah.
So we're in this room. From now on, anybody that tries to come in the door, we will collectively decide, like, we don't want that person in here, or, no, sure, come on in. However we feel about it. So I'm not sure what my point was. I guess I was just wondering if that model of hierarchies is in terms of race, religion, social class, education, attainment, whatever, if that makes sense to you, or if that just seems like
I think definitely that's kind of something we touched on in class, and I don't know if I want to make a statement about what I think that hierarchy would be right now, but I definitely think that class and education plays a large role in today, because we have talked about, you talked about the narrative of the good and bad immigrant, and the good immigrant, I might be stealing your words right now, but the good immigrant is the doctor or the scientist who comes here, and they have a special visa to come here, and they are considered useful to society. But the bad immigrant might be the service worker who might be illegal or undocumented. So I think there is, two narratives, and there's definitely a hierarchy there.
That's interesting. And what interests me, though, is where those, mostly those are, how would you describe this? Like, there's a practical reason why people decide to employ this rhetoric in order to other these groups of people. And usually it's like, well, we've got money, or we've got, control over the situation, and we don't want anybody coming in and messing around with that. That's the reason. But then you have situations like Japan, which we happen to have a listener. Hello, Japan. Konnichiwa? No. Yeah. Ohio? Something like that. Anyway. Can't remember what time of day it is over there. 8, 9. It's Ohio. Ohio gozaimasu. What was I? Where they're very resistant to immigrants coming in, even though they really need people to do certain kinds of jobs. So it's like they need laborers,
Yeah.
They should be going, oh, welcome. You're a laborer? Oh, good. You don't have much education? Fine. You're not competing with me. You can take care of grandma, or you can, do this stuff. But even though they need it really badly, their population is aging, and there aren't enough younger people being born, they still resist. They're still very resistant to people coming in because they want to maintain their social, cultural,
Yeah. I think immigration has always been a sort of politicized idea, right? So it's been used to gather votes,
Right.
to elect certain people into power, right? To attach other policies to immigration as a way to sort of sneak in those, and that would affect everybody, right?
Yeah.
So in this sense, immigration is needed, even by someone like Donald Trump, who has this rhetoric, and he says, or he may even hate immigrants, right?
Yeah.
But he needs them to work at his hotels, right?
Sure.
Right? And he knows that, right?
Yeah.
So immigration is both this thing that is needed because it provides low wage labor,
Yeah.
but also a way to control the value of the labor is to marginalize it, to criminalize it, to demonize it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So limit immigrants have, if they're seen as criminals, they don't have an ability to sort of fight for higher wages, to fight for better working conditions, to sort of organize themselves, because there's always threat of being deported, being put to jail.
Yeah.
Right? So in a sense, the society we live in both needs labor, but it also needs to discredit it. It has to be worth less than a citizen's labor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is interesting, though, because, well, yeah. This is not a but. This is a separate thing, but is that a cookie that's sticking out up there on that top shelf in a plastic bag? Do you see that
Yeah,
right in the
I
middle?
think it is. Yeah.
It's a cookie. Okay, I'm sorry. A total non sequitur, but I'm sitting here talking and kind of looking up there, and I'm thinking, what the heck is that? There's a cookie. Okay. Well, all right. So that totally changed. What was I going to say? Oh, I was thinking that. Wow.
You said it's not a but.
Well, I was going to say something about it's this concept of assimilation. I guess that's what I was going to bring up, and how one of the big complaints that people use is like, oh, the immigrants these days, they don't assimilate like they used to. Like, yeah, there were a lot of immigrants coming in back in the 1800s, but they couldn't wait to shed their language and start speaking English and wear our clothing and adopt our religion and all that stuff. But the thing is that people are more liable to embrace a culture that embraces them back, and you're much less liable to do that if if what you encounter are hands in your face going, no, go away. It's like, what can you do but retain your existing identity, because that's all you've got, and that there at least you had a status, there at least you had a sense of self and all this stuff. And when you come here and your only response is, I don't want you, go away, leave me alone, of course people aren't going to assimilate. So I'm not sure what my point was, other than that just it seems like that even in utilizing your concept of how, yeah, we have to treat immigrants in this way in order to devalue their labor to the point where we can afford it, it serves the function that it's supposed to serve, which is cheap labor. At the same time, it seems like you're hurting it by rejecting.
Well,
and
well, if we sort of look at culture, right, and what immigrants are supposed to assimilate to, right?
Yeah.
Right? What exactly is that? Is culture static like that, right? So if we're here in Champaign-Urbana, we go to Chicago, we go to Springfield, each of one of those places has a particular culture, right?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm from California, it's a completely different culture there, right? So the question is really, is it about culture? What exactly is is expected of immigrants to incorporate or assimilate to.
Yeah.
Right? We don't expect that from people who move from Chicago to move here, right? We
Yeah.
don't expect them to assimilate to the culture here, right? Eventually,
Sort of.
well, eventually they do, because you start experience that and you're living that, but it's not an expectation. We don't say you can't move here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can't move to California because you're not going to adopt the culture there.
Right.
Where you don't use that as a justification for not accepting you,
Yeah.
right? So to me, it's not. I think the people that make claims about assimilation, it's not a claim to culture. It's a claim to incorporate into the existing social hierarchies. So if you couldn't adapt to the way the relationships of gender or of race, and accept certain positions of power, then I think that's the real concern. How are the immigrants going to disrupt this power structure that we have existing now?
I think you're right. Definitely that is part of it, but not at all to defend the people who say this. But I'm just going to throw out the fact that I think, so by assimilating, I think, number one, the biggest thing is language. They want immigrants to speak English, right? That's kind of a
That's
given, I think.
usually where they start.
And then, but also little things. I understand exactly your point about regionalism and even Chicago versus Champaign. I know there's different. We have a culture that. I got your point there, but little things that I could see critics of immigration saying, like hanging your clothes out to dry. That's kind of not, on a clothesline in a place where you wouldn't, or on your balcony or whatever. That's not something that's totally widespread in the U.S. anymore, but that might be kind of a cultural thing that is brought over from a different country that for some insane reason some people have an issue with, little things like that. That's the first thing that came to mind for me, but I do think those little things add up to what someone else sees as a problem. They're not adopting to my culture.
Well, so you were studying how local planning commissions and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So here we have power versus the powerless, let's say. What was the upshot of your...
Yeah. I mean, I would say overall, I think the Champaign-Urbana planners do want to be inclusive. I think we're not facing the same issues here on a wide scale that a lot of other communities in the U.S. are, in terms of like animosity toward immigrant groups. But my main conclusion was that there's no comprehensive system in place to make sure that immigrants are incorporated into the formal planning processes like civic engagement and participation in public forums and things like that. So there are in some ways small efforts to incorporate them, but on a large scale, other cities around the country that I'm going to explore that in my next project. So I don't have examples right now for you, but
Yeah.
there are places that have done it on a more systemic level.
So I know this was not the thrust of your study, but I'm just curious if you noticed, is there any difference in the way, say, immigrants' issues were looked at and say existing minority groups like African American in the community are like they moving up immigrants to sort of the same level as you're just one of many marginalized groups, or are you special and you're okay, you've got a fast track for whiteness and you don't?
That's a really good question. I never asked that question directly. That would be interesting. I would say the one difference is that immigrants now, and this is another thing we've talked about in class, immigrants are recognized for their tendency to open business and to be an economic asset to a community. So that is something I heard. Like, we want to reach out to immigrants to open businesses, where I've never heard that a Black community has specifically been targeted, for entrepreneurialism, which that would be one difference, I guess.
Stereotypes and just assumptions about people based on ethnicity or country of origin or whatever still affect the way people think about it.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I wonder too, I think I talked about this last week. Anyway, I've been involved in a thing with the local school board based around my preservation work. And one thing that I noticed in these negotiations that I think I had been aware of before, but I never really dealt with in quite such a dramatic way, was how officials in power or entities with power will decide. They kind of take two approaches. They either decide they're going to include you in the conversation or exclude you. The end result tends to be the same either way. It's just one, they'll talk to you and be very polite and listen and, oh, really, thank you. Well, thank you for your input. And then ignore you and go and do what they were going to do. Or they just shut the door on you and ignore you from the start. And I wonder, in your dealing with the governments or planners dealing with immigrants, is that the way they're approaching them? Is like, we'd like to hear from you, we'd like to talk to you, and then we're just going to go ahead and do what we want anyway? Or are they seriously like receiving input and actually making use of it, as far as you can tell?
I didn't study, it was a short project, so I didn't study like I looked at one initiative that one of those planning bodies did do in terms of immigrant outreach, and I never looked at the implementation. Well, I don't think any implementation has happened
Probably hasn't
yet.
gotten there yet.
But planning takes a long time. But yeah, that would be really interesting to see if they did incorporate that. I would say one other thing I did think that I came across that I think is important is just immigrant inclusion as the actual staff people, because I did speak to some of the immigrant staff persons in one of the planning agencies, and she herself, all of them spoke so highly of the fact that they had a really large immigrant presence in that department, and she just talked about how they've been very flexible with letting her. It's been challenging for her to adapt to the style of planning that we do here versus how it was in her home country. They've been really flexible in allowing her to kind of offer her own input on how they might change what they do. So like, that's not, I guess, including the public, that's, at the agency level, but I think that's important too, so that can make a big difference, actually just having immigrants in your department.
Yeah, that seems very positive, much more so than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Just being on the outside looking in,
Yeah, it was interesting to learn
That is really interesting. That's, yeah. Okay. I'm cheered a little bit, because so often, you read the news or whatever, and it's just like, oh, it's one giant headache after another one. And you get little small changes, and then it's just like, oh, but nothing's really changing. It's just sort of changing the way we talk about it. That's different now, but it's not, the substance isn't any different. And of course, one runs across lots of pessimistic people who are sure that nothing good will ever come of anything, and all that. So it's very heartening to see that. That's very cool. Anyway.
Yeah, that's good to learn.
I forgot what I was going to say. That's the problem with sitting here, is I always think of things to say, and then I'm editing myself and going, okay, well, that is really off topic, so I can't go that way with it. And I can't go, I have to sort of stay right in the middle, and sometimes my ideas just crash and they don't go anywhere, because it's like, I want to talk about this and I want to talk about that, but I've got to stick